Hamilton.
Well, I hope I can cheer everybody up with my little speech, because the motion starts with one of the most spectacularly silly statements you could imagine, that the world scientific community says there are just 12 years left to prevent 1.5 degrees of warming. I'm old enough to remember the invention of the environment as a political issue at the end of the 1960s, and indeed the very first UNESCO conference on Earth Day in 1970. And it's very entertaining to look back at the predictions that were made at that conference, including one from ecologist Kenneth Watt, who warned about the pending ice age in a speech. The world has been chilling sharply for about 20 years, he declared, and if present trends continue, the world will be about 4 degrees colder for the global mean temperature in 1990, but 11 degrees colder in the year 2000. This is about twice what it would take to put us back into an ice age. And well, I've only got 4 minutes, so I don't think I can, thank you. In the same conference, Paul Ehrlich, a renowned doomster on population, said that between 1980 and 1989, some 4 billion people, including 65 million Americans, would perish in the Great Die-Off. And 50 years later, he's still at it. In The Guardian, on the 22nd of March of this year, he's now saying a shattering collapse of civilization is a near certainty in the next few decades due to humanity's continuing destruction of the natural world. So I'm afraid, regardless of the extent to which predictions depart from reality, these people just never give up, do they? Life magazine in 1970 reported, scientists have solid experimental and theoretical evidence to support the following predictions. In a decade, urban dwellers will have to wear gas masks to survive air pollution. By 1985, air pollution will have reduced the amount of sunlight reaching the Earth by 1/2. And I could go on and on and on. Well, here are the facts. Since 1850, the global temperature has increased by 0.9 of a degree centigrade. And half of that increase took place before 1950, when it's generally accepted that man-made global warming, even if you believe the science said to be behind it, could not have been the cause. But of course, what these predictions fail to cope with is more recent temperature data, because since the great global cooling scare ended in 1975, there has been the following, that until 1998, atmospheric CO2 levels and temperatures did rise roughly in conjunction with one another. But then in 1998, there started a 20-year pause in increases in world temperature, whilst global CO2 figures went up and up and up. And until 2015 or 16, they were flat. Nobody has quite explained how it is that these predictions fail to cope with the reality of temperatures which are recorded by actual observation. In 2015-16, there was more warming, but in 2017-18, there was more cooling. And now, average global temperatures are actually 1 degree Fahrenheit below the computer model predictions. So how do you explain the pause? How can you predict with confidence that in 12 years there will be an increase in world temperatures of 1.5 degrees when the experience of the last 50 years proves the opposite? There are, of course, loads of other alarmist forecasts, which I don't have time to debunk. I can't, I'm afraid. They've only got less than a minute left.
Just show you a map.
Afterwards, please. I'll be very happy to go through it with you. I mean, of course, the biggest threat to the world, if you believe the warmist predictions, of course, is the rise of population, because the world population in 1800 was 1 billion. In 2019, it's nearly 8 billion, and it's forecast to be 8.5 billion by 2030. And most of this increase will take place in rapidly industrialising countries. And we all know what's happening in the Far East. In India last year, there was a 6.7% increase in their emissions. In China, yes, and it's the fact. And this is what one has to recognise. India and China, between them, are responsible for 36% of global CO2 emissions. And in China, there was a 4.7% increase in CO2 emissions, and in India, a 6.4% increase in emissions. Whatever we do in this country is going to be swamped by the reality of what is happening in the Far East. You are proposing to impose massive economic burdens upon the people who are least able to bear them in this country, those at the lower end of the income scale. I think that this is grossly immoral as well as absurd.